So sequence is where our code executes from top to bottom, just like we read a book, first line, then second line, then third line. In selection or if statements, that's where we can branch off our code based on if a condition is true or false. But in this demonstration, I want to talk about repetition. Repetition or loops, that's when we have a block of code that gets run over and over and over again, either for a certain number of times or until a condition is met or while a condition is met. So this program starts out by calling a method called change console colors, which is down here. It's just setting those console colors, and down at the bottom of my main method is prompting the user to press a key to terminate the program, so I can run that, and that's just going to give me a white here it is, a white console window. Press any key to terminate the program. So let's fill this in. First thing I want to do, I want to show a list of dog years for human years 1 to 20. So, or actually from 0 to 20. We'll start with 0. 0 human years is 0 dog years. 1 human years is 7 dog years. 2 human years is 14 dog years, and so on. I want a list of that for dogs aged 1 to 20 human years. Probably a very old dog might live to be 20, and so that's why I want to create this list in this program. Now I already created a method down here that calculates dog years. In my method, notice that this is written in Pascal case with every word capitalized. My method name has a verb in it, as every method name should. And then this method takes in a parameter called human years, and it returns an integer. Now what I mean by a parameter is, what do we need in order to perform this calculation? If I asked you, how old is my dog in dog years? You would say to me, well, first I have to know how old your dog is in human years. How old is your dog in human years? And if I said, oh, my dog is 3 human years, then you would do this calculation, right? You would multiply my 3 dog years, or 3 human years, by 7, and tell me that your dog is 21 dog years old. And that number that you told me, you said your dog is 21 dog years old, that's the integer up here that we're referring to, the return type. And whenever we have a return type in our method, we need to have this return keyword. This method's just a single line of code. I'm performing the calculation and returning the value in a single line of code down here. I could have declared a variable called dog years and as an integer, and then performed the calculation and then returned it. I could have done this in 3 lines of code. I just did it in 1 for brevity. So I have this nice method already written, and so I think I would start doing something like this. And so we have token 0 human years is token 1 dog years. Token 0 is going to be my number 0. And for my token 1, I am going to call my calculate dog years method and pass in that same parameter of 0. So when I run this, I should see 0 human years is 0 dog years. Let's give this a run. And 0 human years is 0 dog years, just like I expected. Okay, so we'd have to do this, 20 more times, right? I want to show that 1 human year is what ends up being 7 dog years, right? And I want to do this a few more times. I want to do 2 dog years is that 3 human years is this many dog years. 4 and 4. Okay, so I can show you what I have going on now. Oops, sorry about that. I erased a closing parentheses. Okay, so you see what I'm getting at. Now, the problem is I need to write this line of code 16 more times to get this list of dog years for human years 0 to 20. This is very slow, and if you notice, almost every single one of these lines of code looks identical, right? So I don't want to do this method. I want to show a list of dog years the right way. What I'm doing up here is the wrong way. Too many lines of code, too much processing, too messy, and my hands are going to get tired from typing and copying and pasting and changing all these values, and I might make a mistake, like put a 5 in here and a 4 in there, and then I'm going to have misinformation in my output, right? So let's comment this out. This is not the right way we want to do things. We want to do things the right way. And I'm going to do a loop to do this. I'm going to loop 20 times. Excuse me. Loop 20 times through this and calculate my dog years in a loop. So a loop that runs a certain number of times, so I know I want this loop to run 20 times, actually 21 because I want to include the number 0. I use this for keyword. This for keyword is going to loop through something a certain number of times, and even though for is not a method, it's a reserved keyword in C#, it gets 3 arguments that look like arguments to a method, but they have some differences. The first argument is going to be the data type of my variable that I am going to iterate through with each iteration of the loop. And so I'm going to create a loop variable called years and set that equal to 0. So this is basically, I'm almost creating a variable called years and setting it equal to 0. And then do this loop as long as years is less than 21. So I will see this for 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 18, 19, 20. And then if years is equal to 21, this conditional statement here is going to return false, and the loop will stop operation. Another semicolon, and then finally I'm going to increment this years variable by 1 each time through the loop. The name of a variable followed by 2 plus signs is basically saying add 1 to the value of that variable and store it. Notice that these arguments are not separated by commas like they would be in a method. They're separated by semicolons, but this entire for statement will not end in a semicolon, just like an if statement heading is not going to end in a semicolon. And then we're going to have a series of opening and closing curly braces, and inside of these opening and closing curly braces is going to be the code that I am going to run with each pass through my loop. So I'm going to actually take this code up here, not write it all again, and instead of manually typing in these numbers 4 and 4, I am going to use this years variable up here, because the first pass through the loop, years is going to be equal to 0, and on the last pass through the loop, years is going to be equal to 20. I can also pass in years here as my argument to my calculate dog years method. So the first pass through the loop, this will say 0 human years, because years equals 0 is, and then token 1 dog years, token 1 is calling this method, passing in years, which is 0. If we go down to my method down here, this variable that's being passed in will be 0. 0 times 7 is going to return 0. So our line will say 0 human years is 0 dog years. So that's it. I don't need to copy and paste this 20 more times like I would have to up here. This line of code is going to be run 20 times, once for each pass through the loop. It will start at 0, and the final pass through the loop will be when years is equal to 20. When it's equal to 21, this statement here will no longer be true, and we will exit the loop. So let's run this and see if we get that list I was talking about. There it is. Our full list of human years to dog years. So we have really 21 lines of output here, and all we did was write 1 line of code that got executed 20 times because of the loop. Okay, so that is a for loop when we know how many times we want to run through the loop. And now I want to talk about while loops and do while loops, which are pre-test and post-test loops. Very similar, and most of the time it's personal preference which one you choose. I will show you where there would be a difference. And so this example is going to use quantity on hand, or quantity in stock, call the variable. Let's declare an integer variable for quantity in stock and initialize it to 0. Okay. So actually we'll initialize that to 5. So we have 5 items in stock. We have 5 Apple Watches in stock in our Apple Store. And each time that we sell one, we want to decrement quantity in stock until there are none left. So for this, let's do a while loop. And then after the keyword while, we put a conditional test inside of parentheses. So while quantity in stock is greater than 0. So as long as we have at least one Apple Watch in stock, I want this loop to execute. And so, we'd have some code in here, insert code to sell an item. We're not going that deep with our example here, but this is where, maybe it would be the checkout process for the point of sale system at the Apple Store. We won't worry about that. What we're concerned with is decrementing this quantity in stock variable. So quantity in stock minus minus is going to reduce quantity in stock by 1. And then I should put a comment up here. Tell the user, or I'm sorry, that's for our next one. Decrement quantity in stock. And we'll tell the user how many are left. Let's do that in a console write line. There are token 0 left in stock. And in token 0, I want to display that quantity in stock variable. So the first time this loop runs, quantity in stock will be initialized to 5. That's going to decrement in this line of code to 4, so we should see there are 4 left in stock the first pass through the loop. And then we're going to hit our closing curly brace, which will send the compiler back up to this line. This conditional test will be run again. Now quantity in stock is going to be equal to 4. Is 4 greater than 0? Yes, it is. So run the loop again. It's going to be equal to 3. Run the loop again, again, until quantity in stock is equal to 0, meaning there's none left, and then we won't be able to sell anymore, right? We don't want to sell an Apple Watch if we have 0 left in the stock room. So let's run this. There's all my dog ears. And then down here is my new loop for my quantity in stock. So that loop was run 5 times, 1 for each item we had in stock, and it didn't continue running, which we didn't want it to, because then we would be selling stock that we didn't have. Good. I'm going to comment out this code up here so we don't see those human ears and dog ears over and over again. So this is a pretest loop, and we call it a pretest loop because the test to determine if we're going to run the loop again happens before the contents of the loop. That differs from a post-test loop where we run that test after we have run the loop. So we do this in a do-while loop, and a do-while loop starts out very simply with just the keyword do, probably the shortest line of C# code you will write, and not even a semicolon at the end of that line. So we have the keyword do, and then we have the contents of our loop. And basically I want to run this same loop code again, like I did above. And I am going to comment out this top loop so that it doesn't run, and we just see the output for my do while loop. So we have our do loop, the same loop contents as above, but then at the bottom I use the keyword while, and inside of my parentheses is going to be my conditional test. So the conditional test is going to be while quantity in stock is greater than 0. So I end that with a semicolon, and let's run this post-test loop and see if that output looks the same. Okay, there are 4, 3, 2s 1, 0 left in stock. You might be thinking that looks a lot like the while loop that we did earlier, the pre-test loop and the post-test loop. Well, what's different? I'd like to show you what's different. Let's run both of these loops. So I'm going to uncomment this out, and I'm going to initialize quantity in stock to 0. So we have no iWatches, Apple Watches in stock, and I will do that same variable, setting the variable equal to 0 at the beginning of both loops. Okay, and so we're going to see both loops run, and let's look at the output. There are -1 left in stock. Wow, what happened here? Well, this top loop, the pre-test loop, never ran. Why? Because the first time it hit this conditional test returned false, right? 0 is not greater than 0. Therefore, this statement evaluates to false, so none of this code ever gets run. So this loop never ran once because this test evaluated to false on the first try. Whereas our do while loop, or our post-test loop, we set quantity in stock equal to 0. We have this do statement. This loop runs once. Quantity in stock goes to -1. We say there are -1 left in stock, and then we test to see if quantity in stock is greater than 0, and it's not. So loop execution stops. The difference between a pre-test and a post-test is that a post-test loop is always going to run at least once. And in most cases, that's not a problem. In this case and other cases, it is a problem. There is a clear case that a while loop or a pre-test loop is going to be more beneficial than a post-test loop.